The mahogany conference table at Blackstone Associates gleamed under the crystal chandelier as my mother spread financial documents across its surface like a general planning a battle strategy. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against the quarterly trust fund statements while she delivered her monthly lecture about my financial incompetence. "Charlotte, look at these numbers," Mom said, her voice dripping with disappointed authority. "Your grandfather left you a substantial inheritance and you're squandering it on frivolous purchases and poor investment decisions." I sat quietly in the leather chair, nodding as she pointed to various line items on statements I wasn't allowed to review independently. At 26, I was supposedly the beneficiary of a $800,000 trust fund established by my late grandfather, but according to my family's careful management, the account was steadily declining due to my irresponsible spending habits. "Your brother Marcus has managed to double his inheritance in the same time period," Dad added from across the table, his tone suggesting moral superiority was hereditary. "He understands the value of conservative investments and careful budgeting." Marcus, golden child extraordinaire, had indeed doubled his inheritance, from $800,000 to $1.6 million, according to the quarterly reports our family's financial advisor, Robert Blackstone, provided during these monthly meetings. Meanwhile, my inheritance had allegedly dwindled to $340,000 due to what they termed my lifestyle choices. Charlotte's spending on that apartment, those art classes and her impractical car payments, Mom continued, shuffling through receipts she'd somehow obtained access to. "It's exactly the kind of financial irresponsibility your grandfather feared." The irony was that my impractical Honda Civic cost $180 monthly while Marcus drove a Tesla Model S that somehow didn't constitute irresponsible spending. My expensive studio apartment in the Arts District cost $1,200 monthly while Marcus lived in a luxury high-rise paying $3,500. But somehow his expenses were investments in his future while mine were evidence of poor judgment. Robert Blackstone, the family financial advisor who had managed my grandfather's estate for 20 years, nodded sagely as my parents outlined my financial failures. "Charlotte, your parents are absolutely right to be concerned. The spending patterns we're seeing suggest a fundamental misunderstanding of wealth preservation." "I understand their concerns," I said quietly, playing the role of chastened trust fund beneficiary. "What do you recommend?" "More conservative management," Robert replied smoothly. "Perhaps we should transfer additional oversight to your parents until you demonstrate better financial discipline." This was the moment they'd been building toward for months. More oversight meant more control. More control meant greater access to funds that were supposedly mine but practically theirs. "Charlotte," Dad leaned forward with practiced paternal concern, "we're not trying to control you. We're trying to protect you from yourself." Protect me from myself. The phrase had become a family mantra, used to justify everything from monitoring my bank account to requiring approval for purchases over $500. I was a grown woman with a master's degree in art history who supposedly couldn't be trusted to buy groceries without oversight. "What kind of additional oversight?" I asked, maintaining the facade of cooperative concern. Mom slid a document across the table. "Just some adjustments to the trust management structure. Nothing dramatic." I read through the legal language carefully, noting clauses that would give my parents signing authority over investment decisions and access to monthly distribution approvals. Essentially, they wanted legal control over my inheritance while maintaining the fiction that they were protecting me from my own poor judgment. "This seems extensive," I said cautiously. "Charlotte," Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the condescending tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. "I had similar oversight when I was struggling with financial decisions. It actually helped me develop better judgment." Struggling with financial decisions. Marcus had never struggled with anything in his life, including financial decisions that were apparently made for him by the same parents who were now demanding control over my money. I signed the papers because I'd been signing similar papers for 18 months. Each one granting additional oversight and control to people who claimed to be protecting my best interests while systematically restricting my financial autonomy. After the meeting, I walked to my car in the parking garage, my mind churning with familiar frustration. The monthly financial reviews had become exercises in humiliation disguised as family concern, opportunities for my parents and brother to lecture me about responsibility while Robert Blackstone nodded approvingly and collected his management fees. My phone buzzed with a text from my art instructor, Professor Williams. Charlotte, I wanted to discuss your final project. Your analysis of financial fraud in estate planning was remarkably sophisticated. Have you considered pursuing this research further? The text reminded me of the secret I'd been keeping from my family for 6 months. My impractical art history degree had led to specialized coursework in art authentication and fraud detection, which had evolved into an intensive study of financial fraud patterns in family wealth management. What had started as academic curiosity had become personal investigation when I'd begun recognizing familiar patterns in my own trust fund documentation. Professor Williams had connections throughout the financial forensics community, and she'd introduced me to investigators who specialized in trust fund fraud and family financial exploitation. Through those connections, I'd learned that my family's financial management practices raised several red flags that warranted further investigation. I drove to my studio apartment, the financially irresponsible space that had become my sanctuary and secret research center. The walls were covered with financial documents, legal precedents, and family wealth management case studies that told a very different story than the one presented in our monthly meetings. Hidden behind my art supplies was a filing cabinet containing 18 months of documentation I'd been secretly gathering: bank statements, investment records, legal filings, and correspondence between my family and various financial institutions. The picture emerging from this evidence was disturbing. My phone rang as I unlocked my apartment door. Unknown number. Charlotte Richardson? This is Diana Ashworth with Ashworth Financial Investigations. Professor Williams referred you to our firm regarding potential trust fund irregularities. I closed my apartment door and activated the deadbolt before responding. Yes, Professor Williams mentioned you specialize in family financial fraud cases. We do. Based on the preliminary information you provided through Professor Williams, we'd like to schedule a comprehensive review of your trust fund management. Some of the patterns you've identified are concerning. What kind of patterns? Discrepancies between reported account values and actual market performance, unusual fee structures, and documentation irregularities that suggest potential fiduciary breaches. When can you meet? Tomorrow afternoon? Perfect. Charlotte, I want you to understand something before we meet. If we find evidence of fraud or mismanagement, the financial and family consequences could be significant. Are you prepared for that possibility? I looked around my apartment at the evidence I'd been collecting, thinking about the monthly humiliation sessions disguised as financial reviews, about signing papers that granted increasing control over my inheritance to people who treated me like a financially incompetent child. I'm prepared. The next afternoon, I sat in Diana Ashworth's office in the financial district, surrounded by documents that told the real story of my trust fund. Diana was a former federal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar financial crimes, and her analysis of my family's financial management was methodical and devastating. Charlotte, I need you to understand what we're looking at here, Diana said, spreading bank statements across her desk. Your trust fund was worth $2.8 million when you turned 25, not the $800,000 your family reported. I stared at the numbers, my heart racing. That's not possible. They showed me statements. Fabricated statements. Your family has been providing you with false documentation while systematically withdrawing funds for their own use. She pulled out additional records. Marcus never had a separate inheritance. His supposed $1.6 million portfolio is actually money transferred from your account. Your parents have been using your inheritance to fund his lifestyle while convincing you that you're the irresponsible one. The room spun slightly as the implications sank in. How much have they taken? Approximately $1.4 million over the past 2 years. The Tesla, the luxury apartment, the business investments your parents made, the European vacation your family took last summer, all funded with money from your trust. But Robert Blackstone, he's been managing our family's money for 20 years. Diana's expression darkened. Robert Blackstone has been complicit in systematic embezzlement from your account. We believe he's been splitting the management fees with your parents while facilitating unauthorized withdrawals. I felt sick. What about the papers I signed yesterday? Those papers would have given your family complete legal control over the remaining funds, allowing them to continue the embezzlement with your documented consent. How much is left in my account? Diana hesitated. Officially, About $340,000, which matches what they've been telling you. And unofficially, we've identified additional accounts that appear to contain funds diverted from your trust. The total recoverable amount could be as high as $2.3 million, plus interest and penalties. $2.3 million. I'd been living like a struggling graduate student, accepting lectures about financial responsibility and signing documents granting additional oversight, while my family systematically stole millions of dollars from my inheritance. Diana, what are my options? Criminal prosecution for embezzlement and fraud, civil recovery actions, and asset freezing orders. We can also seek criminal charges against Robert Blackstone for fiduciary breach and fraudulent documentation. What would that look like? FBI investigation, grand jury proceedings, potential federal charges. Your family would likely face significant jail time and be required to make full restitution. I thought about the monthly meetings where they lectured me about financial responsibility while stealing my inheritance. About Marcus's condescending advice about money management while driving a car I'd unknowingly purchased for him. About the papers I'd signed just yesterday that would have legalized their theft. Let's do it. Diana began pulling forms from her filing cabinet. Charlotte, once we initiate this investigation, there's no going back. Your family will discover not only that you know about the fraud, but that you have evidence to prosecute them. Are you prepared for their reaction? I'm prepared for them to face consequences for their actions. We'll need to coordinate with federal investigators and potentially testify before a grand jury. The process could take months and will likely destroy your family relationships permanently. I looked at the bank statements showing my real account balances, thinking about 18 months of being treated like a financially incompetent child while sophisticated thieves systematically stole my inheritance and convinced me I was the problem. My family relationships were destroyed the moment they decided I was too irresponsible to manage money they were stealing from me. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing the evidence Diana's team had compiled. Bank transfers, forged documents, falsified statements, and email communications between my parents and Robert Blackstone discussing how to maintain the fiction of my financial irresponsibility while maximizing their access to my funds. One email exchange was particularly damning. From Robert Blackstone to my father. Charlotte's questions about account performance are becoming more sophisticated. We may need to accelerate the timeline for complete oversight transfer. My father's response: we'll handle Charlotte. Her art history background makes her susceptible to arguments about practical financial management. The monthly meetings are keeping her compliant. They had literally strategized about how to manipulate my educational background and personality to maintain their fraud scheme. My phone rang. Mom's number. Charlotte, we need to talk. Robert called about some irregularities in your account documentation. What kind of irregularities? Someone has been asking questions about your trust fund management. Did you give anyone permission to review your financial records? The speed with which they'd discovered Diana's investigation was telling. It meant they'd been monitoring my account access closely, probably through Robert Blackstone's system. Mom, I've been doing some research about trust fund management best practices. Silence. Then, Charlotte, we've discussed this. You don't have the expertise to evaluate complex financial management decisions. That's why we have professionals. Professionals like Robert Blackstone, who had been embezzling my inheritance with their knowledge and participation. Maybe I should get a second opinion about my account performance. Absolutely not. Robert has been managing our family's money successfully for decades. Outside interference could jeopardize your entire inheritance. The threat was barely veiled. Stop investigating or risk losing everything. Money they'd already stolen but wanted me to believe was still at risk due to my poor judgment. I'm just trying to understand why my account performance has been so poor compared to market averages. Another pause. Charlotte, you need to come home tomorrow night for dinner. We need to discuss your recent behavior before you make decisions you'll regret. They were circling the wagons, preparing for damage control that would likely involve intensified manipulation and possibly attempts to have me declared financially incompetent. I hung up and immediately called Diana. They know about the investigation. Expected. Your family will likely escalate their control tactics now that they realize you're asking questions. We need to move quickly. How quickly? We're filing criminal complaints tomorrow morning. Federal agents will be executing search warrants by tomorrow afternoon. The next morning I woke up to 12 missed calls from my parents and a text from Marcus. Charlotte, what the hell have you done? The FBI is at Mom and Dad's house with search warrants. I called Diana immediately. It's happening? Agents executed warrants at your parents' residence, Robert Blackstone's office and Blackstone and Associates this morning. They've seized financial records, computer systems and documentation going back 5 years. What happens now? Your family will likely be arrested within 48 hours. The evidence is overwhelming, and they won't be able to claim ignorance given the email communications we've uncovered. My phone was ringing constantly with calls I wasn't answering. Family members, family friends, probably reporters who had heard about federal agents executing search warrants at prominent local addresses. 2 hours later, Diana called with updates. Charlotte, the search warrants produced additional evidence. Your family wasn't just embezzling from your trust fund. They were running similar schemes with other clients through Robert Blackstone's firm. Other clients? At least 6 other families. The total fraud amount could exceed $15 million. My family hadn't just stolen from me. They'd been part of a systematic fraud operation targeting multiple trust fund beneficiaries. I was one victim among many in what appeared to be an organized financial crime network. Diana, when will I know the final recovery amount? The asset tracing is ongoing, but preliminary estimates suggest we can recover approximately $2.7 million from various accounts, plus penalties and interest. You'll likely receive more money than your original inheritance was worth. That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number that turned out to be a reporter from the Financial Crimes Division of the local newspaper. Ms. Richardson, we're covering the federal investigation into Blackstone and Associates. Would you be willing to comment on your experience as a victim of their alleged fraud scheme? I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. Can you confirm that you were led to believe your trust fund was worth significantly less than its actual value? The reporter's question made me realize the story was already public. My family's arrest and the federal investigation were apparently newsworthy enough to warrant media coverage. I hung up and turned on the local news, where the story was already the lead. Local family arrested in multi-million-dollar trust fund fraud scheme. The report included photographs of my parents being led away in handcuffs, Robert Blackstone's office being searched by federal agents, and a general description of a fraud scheme targeting trust fund beneficiaries who were convinced they were financially irresponsible while their inheritances were systematically stolen. My phone rang again. Jessica, my father's sister. Charlotte, I just saw the news. Is this real? Are your parents really accused of stealing your inheritance? Aunt Jessica, I can't discuss the details, but yes, there's an ongoing federal investigation. But they always said you were having problems managing money. That was part of the fraud scheme. They convinced everyone I was financially irresponsible while they were stealing my inheritance. Silence. Then, Charlotte, if they were lying about your financial situation, what else were they lying about? It was a question that would echo through our extended family as the full scope of my parents' deception became clear. The narrative they'd constructed about my financial incompetence had been so convincing that even my aunt had believed I was a struggling trust fund beneficiary who needed family oversight. The trial lasted 6 months. During testimony, the full scope of my family's fraud scheme was revealed to a packed courtroom that included extended family members who were finally learning the truth about our family's financial situation. My parents had embezzled $1.4 million from my trust fund. Marcus had never had a separate inheritance. His entire lifestyle had been funded by money stolen from my account. Robert Blackstone had facilitated the fraud in exchange for inflated management fees and kickbacks. The evidence included the email communications where they discussed how to maintain my compliance through monthly humiliation sessions disguised as financial reviews. They had literally strategized about psychological manipulation tactics to keep me from discovering their theft. During my testimony, I described the monthly meetings where they lectured me about financial responsibility while stealing my inheritance, the papers they convinced me to sign that would have legalized their theft, and the 18 months I spent believing I was a financially incompetent trust fund beneficiary who couldn't manage money. Ms. Richardson, the prosecutor asked, how did it feel to discover that your family's lectures about financial responsibility were happening while they systematically embezzled your inheritance? like discovering that everything I'd been taught about myself was a lie designed to enable theft. My father received 8 years in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. My mother received 6 years. Marcus, who was deemed a knowing participant despite claims of ignorance, received 4 years. Robert Blackstone received 12 years for his role as the scheme's financial facilitator. The civil recovery was even more complete. I received $2.7 million in recovered funds, plus $800,000 in penalties and interest. The total settlement exceeded my original inheritance by nearly $1.5 million. But the most valuable recovery wasn't financial, it was psychological. For 18 months, I'd accepted their narrative about my financial incompetence while they systematically stole my inheritance. I'd signed papers granting them additional control, attended monthly meetings where they lectured me about responsibility, and lived like a struggling graduate student while unknowingly funding their luxury lifestyle. The federal investigation revealed not just the theft, but the sophisticated manipulation tactics they'd used to maintain my compliance. They had studied my personality, exploited my educational background, and strategically undermined my confidence to prevent me from questioning their management. 6 months after their sentencing, I received a letter from Marcus in federal prison. He claimed he hadn't known about the fraud initially, that he'd believed our parents' explanations about his inheritance and my financial problems. He wanted forgiveness and maintained that family should forgive family. I never responded. Family helping family, it turned out, required honesty, respect, and mutual benefit. What we'd had was exploitation disguised as protection, theft disguised as financial management, and psychological manipulation disguised as family concern. I used the recovered funds to establish a foundation that helps trust fund beneficiaries identify and prosecute family financial fraud. The Charlotte Richardson Foundation has helped recover over $50 million in stolen inheritances and prosecuted dozens of family financial exploitation cases. The trust fund that my family convinced me I was squandering through financial irresponsibility became the foundation for helping other victims escape similar fraud schemes. My supposedly poor financial judgment was transformed into expertise that protects other inheritance beneficiaries from predatory family members. Sometimes the people who claim to be protecting you from yourself are actually protecting themselves from the consequences of their own criminal behavior. Sometimes the financial irresponsibility you're accused of is actually sophisticated theft disguised as family concern. And sometimes the inheritance they convince you you're squandering is actually being systematically stolen by the people offering to manage it better.